Good evening, everyone. Ready to get our program started. Well, don't applaud yet. Your hands will get sore after listening to our speaker tonight, James O'Keefe. Now you can clap for our speaker tonight, James O'Keefe. Like I said, your arms are going to get tired tonight, I guarantee you. My name is Jim Lakely. I'm the Director of Communications here at the Heartland Institute. I'd like, by a show of hands, how many people, and there's more than 200 people in this hall tonight. Yeah. How many people for this is the first time or maybe second time they've ever come to an event for the Heartland Institute? Raise your hand. Wow, that's fantastic. I want to welcome you here. We're very, very happy to see you here. And how many are here because they heard about this event with James O'Keefe with our friends, with an ad from our friends on AM 560? Who heard that ad and that's why they're here? All right, Mike Sackhoff, I owe you $20 more right there. Lost that bet. So that's fantastic, and I want to thank AM 560, our friends, to help get these people out here and to get you exposed to the Heartland Institute, because we believe in liberty, we believe in free markets, and we believe in putting on events like this with the great James O'Keefe. Oh my gosh, on your tables, and I was going to bring it up with me and I just forgot, you see a folder that says freedom. Can you hold that up for me, Brandon? Actually, bring it over to me if you could. You're such a great friend that I met 10 minutes ago. Thank you. So in this little packet here is Freedom Rising. So for almost half the audience who raised their hands because they'd not heard the Heartland Institute before, this is your entry into what we are all about. We're a free market think tank, been around since 1984. We've been fighting for freedom and liberty since the beginning of the second term of Ronald Reagan. And in here you will find some information on how you can be a donor to the Heartland Institute, because we are a non-profit 501c3 organization. We exist on the good graces of the people that support liberty, just as we do, and think we do a good job of it. And we also give out publications to freedom lovers like you that you might find helpful in your life, and you can get information on how you can get those publications to yourself as well. And our development director, Gwen Carver, is here. She's in the back. She's in a beautiful blue turquoise scarf and yellow shirt and black jacket. If you have any questions about how you want to help the Heartland Institute, she is the person to go see, or anybody with a Heartland Institute name tag on their shoulder or on their lapel. So with that, I want to bring up, get the program started for real, and bring up somebody who's going to introduce our fantastic speaker for tonight, and that is the president of the Heartland Institute, Tim Huelskamp. Now, Tim is, I was asking our founding director on the board of directors, Jim Johnston, earlier, how long am I going to keep calling Tim Huelskamp the new president of the Heartland Institute? Because he joined us in July of 2017, and so maybe by the end of this year I'll stop saying that he's the new president of the Heartland Institute. But he came to us from Congress. We didn't hold that against him for sure, and I hope you don't either. Tim, for the record, you're the only one who booed, so that's good. But he's the kind of congressman that the Heartland Institute used to work with, because that's how we get things done. You work with members of Congress who believe in liberty just like you do, and you find ways to spread it through the country. Tim Huelskamp was a member of the Freedom Caucus in Congress. He was in the Liberty Caucus. And he was also in the Tea Party Caucus, which makes sense because Tim Huelskamp out of Kansas was part of that Tea Party wave in 2010 that I know a lot of people in this room were part of making happening. And so that is fantastic, and that's when we knew that he was our kind of guy. Before he was in Congress, he was a state senator, and the people in this room that know a lot about the Heartland Institute knows that we work very much, well, we focused a lot on state legislators. And so while a lot of attention is in Congress, there's a lot that must happen in Congress to make change in the country. There's a lot that needs to happen and does happen on the state level. And so before Tim Huelskamp was the president of the Heartland Institute, he was a customer. And so we're very glad for that. So we started in July of 2017. He moved his family, his beautiful wife Angela, and their children to Arlington Heights, Illinois. So they're here for the long haul, and we're very happy that he is now leading our organization. Please welcome to the stage Heartland Institute President Tim Huelskamp.
Thank you, Jim, and it's a pleasure to see you here tonight. I am a footnote in my understanding in the governor's economic development book. I don't know if you knew that. I am a footnote because I am the only person that moved to Illinois in the last 12 months. No, there's one more. He came back. I see that might make two. So, but I am from Kansas, and we do have a story back in Kansas, and let me share that with you and a little bit about my background. But I grew up in a small town and a small farm, and yeah, somehow ended up in Congress, which is not a testament to me, but a testament to the system. But it does remind me of a story of a preacher down in my area of Kansas, and he was worried about his teenage son. And you might have heard about this story before. And he was worried about his I've got a 16-year-old son, by the way. And this preacher was worried about his son and wanted to know how he was going to turn out. So he decided he was going to test him. So he went in a room, and on his dresser he placed a Bible, a bottle of bourbon, and a pile of money. And he said, now, if my son chooses the Bible, I'm certain he's going to be a son of God, a man of God. He says, if he chooses the bourbon, he, of course, will be a drunk. And if he takes the money, he'll likely be a businessman. So the son comes home, and the preacher is hiding out and looking to see what happens. And the son walks in, he takes a big swig of the bourbon, scoops up the money, puts it in his pocket, and walks out of the room. Oh, Lord, says the preacher, he's going to be a politician. Yeah. I'll tell you, serving 20 years, that is sometimes not far from the truth. So we have a lot of work to do, but I want to tell you a few things. The Heartland Institute has been working on some really huge successes in the past 12 months, and we could spend a lot of time going through this, but I'm going to give you just a couple highlights of things that were underway long before I came. Some of them actually occurred before I got here, but in part they're because of the man in the White House, the folks that he has appointed in the administration. But the Heartland Institute was sitting in the Rose Garden when Donald Trump made the announcement that we've been working on for years, and that was to get out of the Paris Climate Accords. Thank God that happened. We were personally invited. Joe Bass, our founder, was there. We laid the groundwork, and that's what you'll see. You'll hear from James and others. This is something, when we do big things, it just doesn't happen overnight. There's a lot of work that takes place, and a lot of work that's involved in that. And for years, we've been working and making certain that there's actually scientific understanding, that's actually science, and when you're going to talk and debate about climate. And that's exactly what Donald Trump followed, and that's what his EPA administrator is doing today. So number one, we've been very active, being the number one deniers of Mr. Al Gore. That is worthy of a badge of honor. Al Gore hates us, as do I think there's 3 or 4 members of the U.S. Senate in the Democrat Party that stood on the floor of the Senate about a year ago and says we've got to shut down the Heartland Institute. So that is a very good sign. As the good book says, you shall know them by their enemies. And that has been the case. Another thing happened, we work at the state level. As Jim mentioned, that's one of the great things about my job. If we fail and don't pass something in Congress, we have 50 other places to go where we work in 50 different states. But just a couple months ago, our most recent publication was waved around on the floor of the Wisconsin State Senator by a gal who's running against Governor Walker up there, screaming, really literally screaming and saying it's shameful that we would actually bring liberty and into the healthcare debate, that we'd all actually talk about freedom. We'd actually talk about if you're receiving welfare, you probably should be looking for work. And so actually she was afraid that Heartland has taken over the state of Wisconsin. That wouldn't be so bad, but just last week, Governor Walker signed the welfare reform bills that we actually helped develop and push through there. We want to see that happen in every state. 2 upcoming events I want to note about. We have been very active, obviously, on the climate issue and the energy issue. Late last year, we hosted an energy conference, the America First Energy Conference in Houston, Texas, the first of its kind, talking about if you would allow America's energy entrepreneurs to actually operate with freedom and free markets, it's amazing what they can do. And we've been promoting that. It's been amazing. So for the first time ever, in perhaps, I think, 30 to 40 years, we are almost on the edge of being energy independent in this country, and that's because of free market policies taking place. That is great news. We have another conference coming up this summer in New Orleans. And we hope Scott Pruitt will be there. He was there by videotape, as were many other members of the administration. And so we're very excited by that. Last major announcement, October 26th. Note that on your calendar. We have our annual benefit dinner. That'll be right here. We have a tremendous speaker, maybe not as good as James, but you will be very excited. I can't reveal his name right now, but we think you will judge him to be a very fantastic speaker. So keep that on your calendar, and we will have invites out very soon on that. So one of the other things, look us up on the internet at heartland.org. Check out our podcast last year. Our podcasts were downloaded 2.4 million times. Folks are listening to the issues of freedom and liberty. They're not hearing it from their politicians, but they want to hear it. Because everywhere it's tried, whether it's healthcare, whether it's education, choice actually can work. Freedom is not just a concept, it's something that actually works, and we're very proud to be a part of. So now let me turn to the reason you're here, and that's James O'Keefe. Most of you first heard of James, I suppose, when he partnered with the great and dearly departed Andrew Breitbart with a series of video exposés that brought down Acorn. Now, given you're from close to Chicago, maybe some of you are, that probably hits really, really close to home, and with our former president. So we love Andrew Breitbart as well. We actually have our event space named in his honor. Together, James and Andrew changed journalism as we know it today, and very much for the better. James is an award-winning journalist and writer, though he tells me he did not win the Pulitzer Prize. He got something like a secondary Pulitzer Prize, and he's going to discuss this later today, and it's pretty amazing. Because when you're effective, I found this, when you're effective in doing the right thing, people don't like it. And they push back, and they're threatened. It's amazing. And they often told me, says, what can one man do in Washington? What can one woman do in the state legislature? Well, based on what they do to me and what they do to James, one person can make a difference. And for the young man that's 14-year-old and others here, just remember that. One person can make a difference, and we're here tonight, what he's done that. James has made a difference. His activities have led directly to the passage of new legislation, federal and state investigations, not just of him, congressional inquiries, the defunding of taxpayer-funded groups, resignations, firings, disciplinary actions, and even arrest. His series of voter fraud exposed several states and required them to reform their election laws. I come from the state of Kansas. Anybody ever heard of my friend Chris Kobach? Yeah, absolutely. We've been trying to expose and do things in Kansas as well, and James has been working nationally to help make that happen. And during the 2016 election cycle, Project Veritas released videos exposing key Democrats, just happen to be Democrats, not only admitting voter fraud exists, but also showing how to successfully commit it on a massive scale. And Slate.com, that great friend of the left, said O'Keefe has had more of an impact on the 2012 election than any other journalist, back when they were calling you a journalist, I guess, back then, so James. So he also caused a Planned Parenthood, my favorite, a Planned Parenthood vice president to be fired, Lila Rose, and give her compliments as well, a friend of mine. He caused National Public Radio executives to be fired. Actually, I think they should all be fired. And replaced with Mike here. He could do the whole job, absolutely. He got an Enroll America director to be fired, mandatory retraining of Medicaid workers, and that's just scratching the surface. James O'Keefe, in my mind, is the most daring journalist working today, and he's the most dangerous man in America. If you're a corrupt leftist organization or part of the mainstream media. But I repeat myself. Now with that, I'm going to turn it over to James O'Keefe, and he's going to inspire us with his tremendous activities. James, thank you for being here tonight.
changed the history of journalism. They would never believe this if we didn't have it on video.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. That was a little reel of our episode that came out last year called Truth. A good job to the Veritas production team. I am James O'Keefe. I work with Project Veritas, one of the only undercover investigative journalism organizations in the world, actually. This week, Tim alluded to this, the Washington Post, I'm not making this up, won a Pulitzer Prize for investigating Project Veritas. I'm not making that up. Tuesday, Thursday, what is it, Wednesday? Yesterday, it was announced the Pulitzer Prizes, and one of our people got compromised. I'll get to that in a bit, but amazing. They had actually ambushed me and covertly filmed one of my undercover journalists. We'll talk about that. So, what I'm going to do tonight is you're in for a treat. It's quite a presentation. There's some clips, there's some history, there's some stuff about Chicago, and then even your Congresswoman, I guess it's Jan Jakowski's husband, who is disgraced, terminated from the Hillary Clinton campaign, and is now suing me in federal court. So it's very exciting. I live a very exciting life. I have some 15 pieces of litigation against me. I have both the California and the New York Attorney General trying to actively shut me down, but there's so much fun. So let's get started. Project Veritas' mission is very straightforward, very simple, to expose waste, fraud, and abuse and corruption in society. In order to do that, we have to dig deep. There's no virtue in passing along untrue information to the masses, so we have to pose as something we're not to get the people to trust us. Now, I read this book in high school, George Orwell's 1984, which was the year I was born, by the way, prophetic. And Orwell says, and this is really the fundamental thesis behind, Project Veritas. Orwell says, the party, and you could consider that to be the establishment, the deep state, the Washington Post, tells you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. Orwell writes on behalf of protagonist Winston, he says, that is their most essential commandment. Do not believe the evidence of your own sensory perceptions. Believe what we show you. Believe how we interpret the world. So there is a little weapon against lies and propaganda, and that weapon is the video camera, particularly the hidden video camera. It captures reality. The establishment wants to interpret reality, we capture reality. And reality beats propaganda like rock beats scissors. It just cuts right through it. So that's why we do it. Now, and all the things I'm going to show you, it's very simple, very straightforward. Some of these videos are 30 seconds long. They're funny, but it's always just people talking to each other. I'm not characterizing it. I'm not writing articles about it. I'm not putting flowery language in it. The extent of my involvement in most of these videos is me going, check this out. St. Augustine said the truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it, you just show it, and it will defend itself. This is the fundamental vision statement that we believe in, also known as the truth does not need to be explained. It only needs to be seen. So our vision statement is to expose the corruption at the highest levels. That's a new one. We got started going into welfare offices and talking to, NPR executives, which you couldn't caricature them if you wanted to write about them. They're so ridiculous. But now we're going after the highest levels such that it achieves critical mass, changes people's hearts and minds, and compels reform of society's institutions. Like this.
He's back! Not Bin Laden, James O'Keefe.
This video is from the conservative watchdog group Project Veritas.
Wading across the Rio Grande to show how easy it is to evade border security.
A recent trip by investigative reporter James O'Keefe was documented and played at the local grassroots meeting. This video has caught a lot of attention online.
So just notice something. It's just a 20-second video of me crossing the Rio Grande dressed like a terrorist. And it got CBS News, ABC News, CNN, Fox News. I mean, this is like, I didn't write a policy paper about it. I didn't protest immigration. I don't even have an opinion on immigration. Good, there should be immigration. But it is a fact. It is a matter of fact that you can dress up like that and cross the Rio Grande River in Hudspeth County, Texas, and literally have border agents drive in the opposite direction. That's actually what happened. I was running through the desert in battle fatigues and a fake turban on my head. And the feds drove in the opposite direction. Now, this pissed a lot of people off. I mean, there was a congressional hearing about it. You'd have to spend millions of dollars if you're a lobbyist to get congressional hearings about your issue. We just make 20-second YouTube videos.
Well, you know, it's interesting because an American reporter named James O'Keefe, dressed as Osama bin Laden, walked across the border of the Rio Grande River undetected. Is something like that concerning you?
Actually, sir, he was not undetected. He was known to the border security agencies who saw him.
And why didn't they stop him when he came across?
Sir, I can't answer that question.
Now, so they can't answer the question. I don't know why these people have to perjure themselves so much. There is a punishment for the citizens for not perjuring ourselves, but being forced to talk to the government so much they find contradictions in what we say. They lie to us all the time and get away with it. Over and over again. So, another thing we do at Project Veritas is try to shift what we call what has been called the Overton Window, which is a term that was derived from the Mackinac Center, I believe that's in Michigan, to shift the range of ideas that is acceptable to discuss. An example of that would be Trump's impact on the immigration issue. Because he wants to deport people, now maybe the wall is something that is suitable. So Project Veritas is video journalism because we live in our country is so filled with lies that when you see these things, it makes you shift your perception of the world around you. Case in point, voter fraud. Tim talked about our investigations. Some of these things are so simple. In fact, they used to happen in Chicago. Pulitzer Prize-winning reporters used to actually go into voting booths and get offered ballots, and they'd win a Pulitzer Prize for doing that. So it's not like we're doing something new. What's new about our voter fraud investigative work was that it was done, distributed to the masses in an internet era, in an age when there's very little journalism. So this is us getting offered Eric Holder's ballot in Washington, D.C. That was a total sidestep. But let's actually watch the video that prompted Eric Holder to be grilled in Congress. By the way, that's true democracy in action, forcing the Attorney General of the United States to go under oath to defend himself because some 26-year-old living in his parents' house made a YouTube video about it. I'll be back faster than you can say furious. The poll worker had no idea what was going on. He's compelled to give out the ballots. So you know what's really funny about this video? After we got offered the Attorney General of the United States' voting ballot just by saying his name, they actually instituted a policy only for Eric Holder in the District of Columbia where they had his big picture of him on the polling booth next to where he votes. They actually instituted photo ID for Eric Holder, but nobody else. It's like right out of Animal Farm. Some animals are more equal. They don't even, here's the thing, they don't even believe in their own policy prescriptions. They exempt themselves from all of their policy prescriptions. So as Alinsky would say, another Chicagoite, which I actually think that a lot of what Alinsky writes is actually not immoral, but just tactical. How to be effective, how to expose hypocrisy. And Alinsky says, make them live up to their own principles. There's nothing sinister, and people say, oh, Alinsky's the devil. There's nothing Machiavellian about exposing hypocrisy. In fact, I would argue it's just and Christian to expose hypocrisy of the left, not Machiavellian. So maybe you should read Rules for Radicals again. But if you don't want to do that, one of the things I like to talk about is the impact that this sort of investigative reporting has on the body politic. And it is this is a fancier way of putting it, but we patrol the boundaries of the moral order, offering the community, society, an opportunity to attest and affirm what is and what is not an outrage. What is outrageous to people? We live in a country that is extremely polarized, maybe to Civil War eras in some regards. There's a sort of, as Breitbart would say, an electronic civil war going on in this country, so there's no moral consensus about anything. And I think that what we're trying to do is create a type of moral consensus. That is to say, if you see a ballot offered to a stranger, most people would say that's wrong. So let's give you an example of an issue that's extremely controversial right now. Teachers' unions. If you don't want to give them everything, you hate children. And the people on the other side think that there should be reforms. So this is a simple undercover investigation that anybody can do anywhere. You walk into a teachers' union and you say, you could say it hypothetically so that you're not triggering any law breaking. I have a friend that may have, what if he abused a child, called him a racial slur, or had sex with an underage girl, and he's a teacher and he's tenured. We did this in New York to the president of the Westchester County Teachers Union. That's a very big deal. She's the president of the Westchester, New York Teachers Union. Let's see what she says to the pretend faux child molester. She does not know she's being filmed.
You're just going to smile and suck it up, and you don't talk to anybody. I don't care if it's your best friend. I don't care if the phys ed teacher you went to high school with. You don't fucking tell anybody anything. Right. And if I have to hit you in the back, hit him in the back of the head with the dust. You don't tell anybody.
Just that 20-second clip, 20 seconds of film, ignited a firestorm. And all the parents in Westchester County, most of them are Democrats, were outraged. Outraged. So much that the Inspector General of Westchester County, New York, in Yonkers, who is also a Democrat, had this to say.
My investigation is designed to get the truth and to root out fraud, abuse, and corruption.
That investigation found that union leaders who are also real teachers should be fired. City Council President Liam McLaughlin agrees.
The fact that these two Board of Education employees failed to cooperate with his investigation, I believe is a further indictment of their actions.
They're failing to cooperate, and then the system exposes itself. They can't get fired, right? And then ultimately, they were fired. They were fired. Patricia Puleo, the head of the union, no longer works there because of the work that we did. The question is I mean, you know, I have a very, this was 2 years ago. We have a very small team, 2.5. How many more people are, if you're a mathematician, just do a basic confidence interval, and you'll find that some 10% of the people in the United States behave this way. So then the real issue is, we have to create a guerrilla army of people to scale and expose it all, because there's no one else that is, the lawmakers don't have the courage to do anything about it. They're accused of hating children. It's the exact opposite is the case in this video. So that's our vision statement. Now, here's the other thing I'll talk to you tonight before I talk about ACORN and the history of undercover journalism and voter fraud. The retaliation, the lawsuits, the threats. People say, aren't you afraid for your life? That is the number 17 on the list of concerns. Not even something I think about. What I think about is the government constantly trying to shut us down. Constantly. In every way you could possibly imagine. I've been incarcerated. I've been sued, defamed. I've won defamation lawsuits, which is very difficult to do if you're a public figure because you have to prove actual malice. I've proved it. And if you look at this picture, this is me crossing into the United States in 2015. One of these times I was actually with my colleague Matt Tiermond in the Bahamas. I've done it from Montreal. I've done it from Canada into Seattle. And each and every time I got stopped for 3 years, the DHS, that's the Department of Homeland Security, pulled me aside and begged to look at my cell phone and ask me who I'm voting for, what investigations I'm working on, and who are my donors. And because technically at a border crossing I have no Fourth Amendment rights, I had to answer these questions. One time I said, I can't in good conscience answer your question about what my password to my phone is, because I'm a journalist and I have sources. And they said, give me your password or I'll have you arrested. If this were to happen to a CBS News guy or a New York Times guy, they would be writing, scripts for Hollywood screenplays. But we live in a very unjust world. So this is the thing. This is the thing that I suppose is the deterrent to people doing what I do. Because it is very difficult to be in a situation where you're basically constitutionally raped and nobody cares. It's really tragic to be incarcerated for a crime you didn't commit and everyone celebrates. It feels wrong. I couldn't watch Law and Order for 6 months. I felt like I was in a sort of legal post-traumatic stress. And then there was that little whisper to me by an advisor or a mentor who said, James, they're doing it because you are effective. They're doing this to you because you're successful. They fear you so much that they do this to you. And that is wisdom. But it's not easy. It's really hard. The New York Attorney General sent us a letter. He actually didn't send me the letter first. You know who he sent it to before he sent it to Project Veritas? He sent it to the media. I was going to a coffee shop to get a tea, and I looked down, circulation 2 million, New York City, Daily News. Gotcha! New York Attorney General investigates James O'Keefe. Well, let me read the letter. I don't have the letter yet. It was sent to the Daily News before it was sent to me. It's a spectacle. It's a circus. The government, we don't live in a country where there's equal justice under law. Of course, all of you probably know this. I've lived it. And I get this letter, and when you're a nonprofit, there's some 5,000 pieces of regulation, all under the jurisdiction of each state attorney general, who selectively enforces provision 401c-7. In 2010, I didn't click a box. I didn't know the box needed to be clicked. We've spent an ungodly amount of money in the last 3 months fighting the New York Attorney General, who has nothing better to do than investigate the investigators. Or you may know about my friend David DeLeiden, who had his home raided by the California with AR-15s, rifles, SWAT team, raided his home because he investigated Planned Parenthood, took his hard drives while he was taking the trash out. Why did they need a dozen stormtroopers with AR-15s to take the guy's computers? Well, because the California Attorney General likes Planned Parenthood. So, moral of the story, you all know this, we live in a very corrupt society. My point is, you think, or maybe some think, and I disagree with them, that the solution is somehow elect the right people to office. I'm sorry, but solutions have become outside of the legislative process. The system is too broken. It's too broken. The administrative state is too complex, it's too vast, and frankly, the Congress doesn't seem to want to actually legislate. So we live in a society where the only solutions are outside of the establishment, in my opinion, and we're fighting these forces. Another quick example about an unjust situation before I get into some fun things. I was arrested in 2010 on so-called phone tampering charges. The FBI affidavit listed the evidence being there was a man outside in a vehicle with a, quote, listening device to pick up transmissions. That was in the affidavit. Do you know what the listening device was? It was my colleague with his iPhone. The FBI referred to my colleague's iPhone in his pocket as a listening device in an affidavit, which was the probable cause to bring a felony charge that I was tampering with phones. That was the probable cause in the affidavit. It was all dismissed later, but no one cares because there were 7,000 Google News alerts about James O'Keefe arrested on a felony. Okay? Now you understand the world we live in. Now you understand how bad it is. If you actually have the mettle to do anything about it, they'll come after you and they'll destroy you. That's what they'll do. But there is hope. I'm giving you the premise 1. Now I'm moving on to premise 2. That's the problem. Here's the solution. Okay, so we don't live in a country with equal justice under law. So what do we do about it? Well, let me talk a little bit about propaganda. And this is the what's different with Veritas versus many people in the mainstream media. If you haven't read a book called Propaganda by Edwin Bernays, you should. And one of the things that people like Bernays and the Dean of Journalism, Walter Lippmann, and people like Ben Bradley at the Washington Post believed in is that we need to create stereotypes for people. We need to filter information because people are too stupid to handle the truth. You can't handle the truth. That's what they believe. So they create elaborate ways to prevent ordinary people who are too stupid from having access to the information. We have the exact opposite vision. We have an infinite faith in people. If they get the truth, they can make the best decisions for their families and society. So there's a conflict of visions happening in media today, and you're seeing it play out with the rise of Donald Trump and Twitter and Facebook, which are upset because people got all this information and they elected Trump president, and they don't like that. So that's what you're seeing happen, and we believe the country is in a state where you're not going to change anything by electing people to Congress. So we start doing these videos. So let me start by talking about Acorn because I'm in Chicago, and I think it's a good flashback. I'm alone and broke, living with my parents, 25 years old, and I get a message from this girl, Hannah Giles, who saw the Planned Parenthood work that we had done with Lila Rose, and she said, have you ever thought about going into Acorn? She sent me, I've never met this girl before in my life, and she sent me a note, and she said, I love your stuff, why don't we go into Acorn? I didn't even know what Acorn was. I YouTubed it. Okay, people breaking down homes, foreclosed homes, breaking the law, they get a lot of taxpayer money. Sounds interesting. And we chat back and forth on Facebook, and Hannah says, what if you went into Acorn and said that you were a prostitute? Now, most people get these sorts of messages and they delete them. I said, are you willing to play the role? And Hannah says, I am willing to play the role. It's my idea. I want to do it. I said, okay, if there's a prostitute, there should probably be a pimp. So I become like this casting director in northern New Jersey, driving around to Ramapo College and Fairleigh Dickinson, which was the college, and trying to find some guy who looks like a pimp, but more like an Italian pimp. I finally found a guy to be a pimp, and he, can't pay him anything, and he flakes out, says I can't do this, so I become the pimp. So I go up to my grandmother, I walk upstairs, and I say, grandmother, do you have a sort of a fur shawl thing from maybe the 1970s? And I can't believe it. Later that day, I go to my bedroom, and laying on my bed is a chinchilla fur shawl. And my grandmother says, and I say, oh my, you found it. And she's like, what are you doing? She thinks, something that isn't true. So Hannah does it, and the rest is history. I produced this video for $1,000 using a camcorder my dad bought me at Best Buy and a borrowed copy of Final Cut Pro on my sister's MacBook. I had no money. I had so little money that I avoided taking 95. I took 301 through Maryland because the tolls were $6 less. And you have a Republican apparatus that spent $1 billion trying to do something about this organization, and they can't. And it takes that.
They dressed up as a prostitute and a pimp to expose April.
Of course, that's just the right-wing lunatic fringe in this country, race baiting, with coded insinuations and incessant attacks on community organizations such as Acorn. Ever since Barack Obama emerged on the national stage, conservatives have been obsessed with the group, alleging that they're thugs or committing voter fraud. Well, those accusations didn't really pan out. But that won't stop their paranoia, as evidenced by this hidden camera investigation of an unlikely duo looking for tax help.
Scenario: a young woman pretending to be a prostitute and a man pretending to run for Congress one day walk into Acorn's Baltimore headquarters
and are promptly shown the door. You
So I'm sitting there thinking, how much more outrageous can I possibly make this sort of question and answer situation? I don't know what to do. I'm not like an FBI alumnus or the CIA, but I guess improvisational acting just came natural to me because we're sitting at the table thinking like, what are we possibly going, okay, there's 13, they're overseas, they're in a shipping container. Okay, now they're actually 10 years old. I want to run for Congress using the proceeds from my pimp money. I mean, I couldn't think of any worse possible Abu Ghraib of the Great Society. And of course, you do these sorts of things, and Andrew Breitbart, this is a flashback, all this stuff is happening in 2009. Andrew Breitbart called it taking the elevator to the penthouse. The institutional left had never seen anything like this. I mean, they could, every narrative that the Koch brothers funded, well, that's just preposterously and profoundly wrong. I was so broke I had to take back roads. You know, they couldn't come up with any narrative. So when you do these things, you think you may be targeting the institution in question. You're actually not. The real culprit is what? What's the actual thing being exposed in this situation? Anyone? The media. Because the media had the power and has the power to do what we do and chooses not to. So they react saying stupid stuff like this.
Goldsmith said that these conservative filmmakers went around to 3 or 4 offices and basically got thrown out with this ruse. And they found one office where there were 2 people stupid enough to sit down and give up this kind of silly...
Oh, wrong. That was just the first day. Day 2, we released tape 3 and tape 4 and tape 5 and tape 6 and tape 7 and tape 8. CNN reported that it was isolated. They had no evidence. They just said it because whatever you can get away with saying at CNN, which is CNN is the most fake of all the fake news. So let's watch video 2 and 3.
You wouldn't see this kind of thing a few miles away at the Acorn office in D.C.
My girlfriend's a prostitute. Okay. And I don't know if... I'm using the money that she's getting. You know what I mean?
Right, but with that, this actually, you don't know where it's coming from. Is what we're trying to tell you.
All right.
We're looking out for you.
Okay, that's D.C. I've seen C-SPAN. It's it all. That would never happen in New York.
They buy a house with a backyard. You put it on right in there, for people behind the desk, say, let's over with yourself, here it is.
Wait, a tin, I put the money in a tin.
And push it there.
I mean, we're just incredulous. They're telling us to put pimp money in a can and cover it with grass. I mean, and I'm not, you know, Hannah's wearing stilettos and a sarong, and we're in Baltimore and Brooklyn. Prostitutes don't look like that. And they fell for it. And the actions were swift. The actions were very swift. The Washington Post had to print a front-page retraction about me. Carol Lenning, a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter, said that I went after Acorn because of my animus towards black people. She just made it up. She had to print a front-page retraction. Just to give you some context, not ever, not once in my whole life, have I ever had to retract any major part of a context of my journalism. And I just want to say this slowly. A Pulitzer Prize winner for the Washington Post had to print 2 front-page retractions about me. That's pretty amazing. Acorn got shut down. Obama defunded Acorn. Obama signed the legislation. Both houses of Congress were democratically controlled. I don't even think the Republicans can do that. So really, it doesn't matter who's in. I mean, I'm going to say something that's controversial here, but I really believe it. I'm only saying what I believe. It doesn't matter who's in power. What matters is that you inform and expose the truth in such a way that it mobilizes people to put pressure on those in power. That's what it's all about. That's what it's all about. So let me briefly pivot into this and then pivot back to American Pravda and your friend Bob Creamer, who's married to Jan Schakowsky. History of undercover reporting. It is a utilitarian calculus. We do believe that we have to use this sort of deception to unmask the truth. I am not the first man to do this. History is replete with muckrakers and troublemakers and crazy people who did things far more ethically dubious than I have done. One of his name is, he's a German guy, Gunther Wohlruf. He says, quote, "My job is to deceive in order not to be deceived." to break the rules of the game in order to disclose the secret rules of power. We got raked over the coals for posing as a source and meeting with the Washington Post to try to covertly film the Washington Post to expose their bias. Gunther Wallraff got a job with the Bild, Germany's largest newspaper. He was a communist, Gunther was, and he was trying to expose the Bild. The paper was biased in their, actually they had anti-organizing practices. So it's not about the techniques, guys, it's about who you're targeting. Then there were Nellie Bly in Roosevelt Island, New York. There were all types of undercover journalism done to the KKK. Reporters used to go, I mean, there's Jack London, there's muckrakers like Upton Sinclair, who posed as a worker and infiltrated the Chicago meatpacking plants, pretended to be a worker. You learned about that in history class. All of these people are looked upon fondly. At the time, they were hated. They were very hated for what they did. They were hated by the establishment, hated by the media, and they spent most of their time defending themselves and writing op-eds and things like that. And then you have, and you advance throughout the 20th century, and you have just run-of-the-mill sort of exposés on the entitlement. This is unthinkable today. It's unthinkable for a journalist to expose entitlements. They used to do it all the time. They used to win Pulitzers for it. Brings to my favorite thing, the Chicago Sun-Times in the 1970s used to do some real, serious undercover journalism that makes me look like the Boy Scouts. One of the things they did was they purchased a bar and aptly named it the Mirage. And they actually didn't pretend to be anyone. They actually were bartenders for 9 months. And they covertly photographed and covertly filmed all the Chicago city building inspectors as they would do bribes and kickbacks, and they'd have pinball machines, and they wouldn't declare all the coins, and the guy would tell them how to defeat the system, and they filmed everything. Without them knowing, in Illinois, which is currently a one-party consent state, which means it's illegal to covertly film, they did it. And they did many, and they caught these guys dead to rights. They caught guys in the booth at the bar talking about cheating the taxpayer and telling them how to do it. And these stories were so magnanimous, they led to the firing, they led to the disciplinary action of all types of inspectors. They led to the mayor being changed, and it got nominated for a Pulitzer Prize, and Ben Bradley, then who was on the Pulitzer Commission, said we're not going to give them a Pulitzer Prize because it just is too much. It's too much. In other words, it's too true. It's too effective. It's too close to home. And in years previous, this is a guy posing as a janitor. This is here in Chicago. His name was William Gaines. He pretended to be a janitor and worked at a hospital, and was the story headline was "Lives Are Held in Grimy Hands." William Gaines actually assisted in surgery. He was asked by the hospital to assist in surgery, and he won the Pulitzer for it, exposing, I have never crossed an ethical line of committing a surgery. But I'm just trying to show you that, well, next time you hear them say O'Keefe's an unethical, criminal, just talk about William Gaines and Pam Zeckman and the Mirage. Andrew Breitbart said the media is everything. So what happened? What happened to journalism? I think everyone in this room would agree that journalism is dead. But why? What happened? What happened? This is before I was born. I was born in the mid-'80s. What happened to this? Well, I write in this book, American Pravda, which I will be signing for you. It comes down, notice I didn't put politics in there. Greed, laziness, and fear. And you might be surprised that I'm quoting Noam Chomsky, but truthfully, the media has become a mass monopoly that depends upon reciprocity of interest with the people that they're supposed to be investigating, which takes us to American Pravda, the book. We decide to investigate the mainstream media directly. We decide to go undercover into the New York Times and CNN. Wouldn't that be great? And we call it Pravda because Pravda was the Soviet word for truth. And the difference between the Soviet Union and America is that the people in the Soviet Union, from my reading of Solzhenitsyn, knew that they were being deceived. In a totalitarian regime, propaganda is overt. Everyone knows it's propaganda. In a democratic republic, propaganda is covert. Most people have no, when people are in the airports and they look at that CNN chyron at the baggage claim at O'Hare, they think, well, it must be true. People don't realize they're being deceived. So our job is to unmask the deception, which is what we did going undercover into CNN. And I even announced that I was doing so at the National Press Club. Who would win? A little itty-bitty button camera or CNN and the New York Times? So let's find out what's going on with this whole Russia thing, shall we? Let's talk to senior producer John Bonifield at CNN headquarters. This was not an easy tape to get. We had to build a relationship with this guy over a course of many months when he spilled the beans about his relationship with the CEO of CNN.
Why is CNN constantly like Russia this, Russia that?
Because it's ratings.
Those ratings.
Our ratings are incredible right now. And the CEO of CNN said in our internal meeting, he said, good job everybody covering the climate accords, but we're done with it, let's get back to Russia.
But honestly, you think the whole Russia shit is just like bullshit.
Could be bullshit. I mean, it's mostly bullshit right now. Like, we don't have any big giant proof. I just feel like they don't really have it, but they want to keep digging. And so I think the president is probably right to say, like, look, you are witch hunting me.
The guy says that Trump is right to say that he's being witch hunted and he's a CNN producer. Can you imagine if we had like people on Mueller's team saying this is definitely a witch hunt? You see the power of this type of journalism? And CNN, I mean, this was a big story. This got the reaction of the White House, made the front page of the New York Post, the most busted name in news. And CNN responded. They said, we stand by our producer because, quote, personal opinion is what makes CNN strong. Personal, diversity of personal opinion. So of course you're thinking, well, that guy, who is that guy? Nobody knows who he is. He's just some producer. You ever heard of Van Jones? Let's see what Van Jones has to say about the Russia coverage.
Hey, man. You met in Palm Springs a few years back. Good for you, man. You good? Yeah, how you been? What are you doing? What do you think's going to happen this weekend with the whole Russia thing? I love things that we nothing burger. Really? You don't think that...
Russia thing just a big nothing burger. Well, why aren't these guys saying this on TV? Are they lying when the chyron, or are they lying in private? Now, the reactions to these videos are some of the funniest things you will ever see in your entire life. By the way, when you're at O'Hare and it's muted, and you're at the baggage claim, and all you see is the chyron, quote, O'Keefe video is a hoax, you don't hear anything. So please don't trust, not that any of you do, the CNN chyrons.
He's been convicted, he's been fired, they have to apologize, he's a scumbag, and he does this stuff all the time.
So when on the tape, you say that the Russian investigation was a big nothing burger. What do you mean?
The best is when even they, see, I'm showing this for a reason, because I'm going to show you all mainstream media, so-called left-wing press, all of them, covering our journalism accurately. Why? Because video is manifestly damning.
And for progressives who keep jumping up and down about this, doesn't make a lot of sense. The worst thing isn't that the guy gives a little hoax. This guy's a hoax, is a farce. The worst thing is the Trump White House didn't elevate.
That really pisses them off. The White House, she gets up and says, everyone watch these tapes, and everyone in the press pool says, I really don't want to write about this, but now I have to.
I would encourage everybody in this room, and frankly, everybody across the country, to take a look at it.
So she's telling everybody to watch the videos. And the great thing about the internet these days, and there's a whole chapter in American Pravda about this, is that I could not pay people on Madison Avenue to come up with this sort of memes. It's called Mimetic Warfare. And just go on reddit.com and find some of these memes. They're really funny. That's a Keenan and Kel reference. I mean, it goes on and on. And what's remarkable about Project Veritas is our videos, I mean, so these videos were the #1 trending video in the world globally on YouTube that day. They beat out all of music. They beat out all of culture. They were the #1 most trending video in the entire global world on YouTube. That begs the question. Maybe these tech companies ought to censor people like me, right? See, we're just evolving through the process. First, it was government tries to shut you down, you find a way around it. Now you find a way around it. Now they're going to try to shut. So now the investigation is first it was the institutions, then it was the media companies, now it's the social technology companies who are censoring people. I mean, it's literally like something like out of an Ayn Rand novel. You are fighting the whole world, and the world constantly tries to shut you down. So now, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I suppose, in some weird, twisted way, we're forced to look at the social media companies and the people in the middle. I love this picture because it shows in the middle those elites, those journalists, those academics who are left wondering, and maybe it's an ego thing. What about me? When I'm supposed to determine what they're supposed to see and hear. I'm the one who gets to be the assignment editor for the chyrons on MSNBC, CNN, so that when all of those people who make decisions pay attention to me, so they start retaliating. And it's what Walter Lippmann called the bewildered herd. The guy sitting in his armchair is what he called the bewildered herd. They're too stupid to get the information directly. They shouldn't get the information directly. We don't want them to get the information directly. Therefore, we're going to start shadow banning people like James O'Keefe. We're going to start shadow banning people like Crowder. People who have dangerous information. And the media is going to create this whole elaborate thing about privacy, even though Obama did the same thing in 2012 and nobody cared. They're going to create this whole circus to somehow change the paradigm that the bewildered herd can get the information directly and unfiltered. So we decided to start investigating Twitter. Why did we do that? I was banned from Twitter during the election for tweeting, doing an investigation of Hillary Clinton. I don't have time to show you all these slides. I was eventually liberated when people sent all these tweets to Jack Dorsey, proving that you can find a way to become uncensored if you push back. So we go undercover into Twitter, and we find this man named Pranay Singh, who's a direct messaging engineer at Twitter, and he's talking about who they ban. He says, quote, if you tweet about guns, God, and America, and the Christian flag, who talks that way, he says, who talks about God, will consider you to be a Russian bot if you tweet about the American flag.
Let's do a random tweet, and like just look at the followers. They'll all be like guns, God, America, like with the American flag, and like the cross. Who says that? Who talks like that?
It's for sure a bot. He goes on to describe how you can ban the bot. Twitter responds and says, we don't do that. You catch the mic. We don't do that. Don't pay attention to your eyes and ears. Only trust us. So, of course, Veritas has like 8 people saying the same thing. This is another Twitter engineer saying that what a shadow ban is.
One strategy is to shadow ban so that you have ultimate control. The other shadow ban is that you ban someone, but they don't know they've been banned because they keep posting, but no one sees their content.
That was definitive. He says you do not. I don't know how many people in this room use Twitter, but it is a very important medium. And what they can do is or Facebook. When you send a note to your friends and family, what these companies can do is prevent your note from being shown on their walls, on their bulletin boards. You think that it's getting them? It's not getting them if they don't like you. If, for example, you tweet about the American flag, Russian bot. God, Russian bot. Cross, Russian bot. Guns, Russian bot. That's what they're saying. And the best part is it's almost like Shakespearean. The media does find this interesting. I got private emails from a couple of New York Times reporters actually who said, this stuff is pretty good. I said, why don't you say that publicly? BuzzFeed News reported, quote, Twitter says no. They're not looking at your information. They're not doing this. So they just basically are echoing what Twitter tells them. But there was a congressional hearing.
Will anybody vote for that sponsorship issue now
idea of a shadow ban is that you ban someone, but they don't know they've been banned because they keep posting and no one sees their content. Is that a practice that occurs at Twitter?
No, sir, we do not shadow ban. These folks were caught on video and weren't speaking on behalf of the company. They were speaking in a personal capacity. We do not shadow ban folks. What we do is if an account is spamming, meaning engaging in malicious automation, we will hide, make it harder.
So he's not stretching the truth a little bit there. And we've got a lot more coming on this issue. But this is the issue. This is the critical issue that our country faces. And we did a few more undercover tapes. This guy talks about looking at people's private pictures. It's pretty disturbing, actually, what he says. If you text your wife or girlfriend on Twitter, they can look at your pictures and they voyeuristically share them with each other. Pretty scary stuff, and that actually did force the mainstream media to pay attention. So the time is now. We are living in a country where perhaps we have maybe a chance to make an impact. There is a sort of synergy between who is in the White House and the sort of Project Veritas vision. And the last thing I'll show you here tonight is the election we did into Bob Creamer, a Chicago operative married to Jan Schakowsky and his firm Democracy Partners. This is tape from the 2016 election. You will hear in the media all types of conspiracy theories about Russian interference. Now I think they're looking at the Access Hollywood tape. They've gotten so far away from Russia now, it's who knows what they're doing. This is actually on tape. This is actually on videotape, them talking about laundering money from the Hillary campaign through a series of subcontractors to incite violence at Trump events. Don't repeat that to anybody. I mean, what's amazing is that you hear in the media so much about Russian conspiracy, and these guys are on tape talking. I mean, they broke FEC campaign law there. They were doing something highly immoral, inciting violence. Hillary knew about it, according to Bob Creamer, who visited the White House to meet with the President Obama 47 times personally. That's a matter of public record. He was fired, according to Donna Brazil, from the campaign. Scott Fovel, a Wisconsin operative who is responsible for most of Wisconsin's voter outreach for progressives, was terminated. And I mean, it's on videotape, and it worked. Now, I want to say two more things about this investigation. First is that sort of Chomsky thesis, which the media is afraid. Now, here's what's interesting about this investigation. We released these videos. There's half of American Pravda talks about this investigation. This was the most sophisticated. It was probably more elaborate than the Mirage in Chicago. We had a dozen people for a year inside the Hillary campaign. Alison Moss was a 23-year-old girl from Minnesota who posed as a niece of a wealthy donor with a common surname from San Francisco that ingratiated himself with Bob Creamer to get inside his office without signing a non-disclosure agreement. There was one moment trying to get into the DNC when they go through a metal detector, and Allison's wearing a hidden camera. And it's just hair, I mean, it's like a spy novel, how she manages. One point, Bob Creamer actually asks Allison, he actually asks her to come to the White House to meet with you-know-who. And she can't go because she's undercover, and it would be a misdemeanor to get into the White House. So we could have gone to the White House to talk about this stuff. That's how big this was. And I write about it in the book ad nauseum. But when we had this story was, I mean, this got 40 million views on YouTube and Facebook. One of the biggest stories of 2016. And we break the story, and I'm thinking everyone's going to cover this. Fox wouldn't cover it. Sinclair wouldn't cover it. Why? I would later learn that these companies, because they're publicly traded and they're regulated by the FCC, were afraid, in the final analysis, of losing their broadcast credentials if Hillary were to be elected president. Do you understand how profoundly wrong that is? To live in a country where mass media is afraid. I mean, these are considered conservative outlets. I assume you all watch them religiously. They're afraid to report facts about Hillary Clinton, October 17th, 2016, for fear of reprisal by an administrative agency that's not accountable to Congress. And the greatest irony of all is I'm a rinky-dink nonprofit group. Like, I should have more to fear than News Corporation. Shouldn't I? Right? But the irony is that it takes outsiders, maybe with, I hate to use the term, nothing to lose, because we do have things to lose. But it takes outsiders, or as Michael Hastings would say, people have to go out in the wilderness. They have to leave the plantation of media to break news. And I was tweeting at these guys, why aren't you covering this? I mean, they fired Scott Fovel. Hannity, to Hannity's credit, Hannity personally called Bob Creamer and Scott Fovel's offices, and Hannity himself got the comment that they were terminated. Sean Hannity himself, he's a good guy. He calls him up. I'm tweeting, Brett, why aren't you guys covering the story? I'm in my office. This is October 18th, 2000. The videos have gone insanely viral. They're the #1 trending thing on Twitter. And I'm watching TV, and this is what they're playing.
There you go. That's more important. That's more important. That's more important because this is more important. I wonder if they checked the quote on this. This is what they're wearing right now.
They were playing cats playing patty cake on network news. And if you watch Good Morning America, it's gerbils on skateboards or whatever, because it's infotainment. And they're afraid. I'm sorry, but they're afraid. And I have sources who tell me they're afraid. I don't quote the sources in the book, but I've got the sources. And it goes back to that whole thing about manufacturing consent. You can't take information from people that are not, that will elicit criticism. But, and here is where the moral arc of the universe bends towards justice each and every time. Every single time. But people were fired, and when they're fired, the Associated Press writes an article about it. The president was asked to Obama was asked to comment about this. And the first title of my book was called Breakthrough, because this moment in our office, I'll never forget, we had all 20 people in our office, and suddenly we have televisions of every news station. It's funny because we're against propaganda, and we have these propaganda organs lining our walls. We had NBC, ABC, CBS, we had CNN, Fox News, and suddenly, I'll never forget, around 8 o'clock, it's in the book, there's a chapter, it's called Breaking Through. Suddenly, every single TV station started playing our videos. And I looked up and I saw Anderson Cooper say this.
Video emerging of a group of pro-Clinton political operatives talking about stirring up trouble and provoking violence at Trump rallies. The video comes from Project Veritas brainchild James O'Keefe, who's got a less than stellar reputation for accuracy. However, some of the things you'll hear on the tape are certainly hard to ignore. Enough we're learning from one person to be fired so far, another to resign. A lot of questions being asked about.
And Cooper was really tough. And Van Jones threw the people under the bus. And one of the Alison Moss person from Minnesota, 23 years old, had infiltrated Bob, who was standing there next to me looking up at the sign that said Project Veritas, and tears were rolling down her face because she spent months inside his office. And that man holding the sign was not one of my people. Twitter, I mean, we broke Twitter. They were probably trying to downrank our, someone get that thing off the hashtag. We had like 800,000 tweets about Project Veritas and like 4,000 about Power Rangers, because Power Rangers was a thing that day, and Power Rangers was trending above us. But But I mean, we were standing there. We were unbelievable. We couldn't believe it, but we had proved the concept that despite all of the censorship, the bias, the intimidation by the government, the market incentives not to cover this stuff, now we had broken through. And we've done it over and over and over again. The key is to scale it. Hillary was asked about the videos on an airplane. I can't remember if this was before or after. It may have been on her way to the debate.
Are you worried about followers who are supposed to, if they're found to have,
I know nothing about this. I'm not, I can't deal with every one of his conspiracy theories, but I hope you all have something to eat and something to drink.
Well, let's go to Applebee's. She just changed the subject. She was also, this was talked about in the debate. I was sitting at this debate in front of Trump and Hillary when he mentioned the Veritas videos. My phone lit up like a Christmas tree. People I went to high school with, I never talked to. Oh my God, 75 million people. This was the most watched debate in American history. And they talked about these videos.
I have a feeling how they came. I believe it was her campaign that did it. Just like if you look at what came out today on the clips, where I was wondering what happened with my rally in Chicago and other rallies where we had such violence. She's the one in Obama that caused the violence.
Yeah, she wasn't happy about that. And she never denied it. Never denied it. Interesting. And this is an amazing moment, too. Of course, they won't let me on TV. That whatever, they blacklisted me. I hadn't been on Fox News in like 8 years. And I'm thinking, I need them to keep talking about the story. I'm backstage in Las Vegas, and I am trying to somehow get people to cover this story. And there's 4,000 journalists there. And I'm walking down this red carpet, and none of them want to talk. So maybe if I sort of walk over to where the cameras are and peer myself in the frame, maybe the cameraman will pivot to me and say, so let's talk about these videos. Because Laura, who works with it, James, you got to get in front of the cameras. And I'm naturally, believe it or not really interested in getting in front of cameras. I want to get behind the camera, not in front of it. But I've got to get the story out. So I walk over to Hannity thinking, well, maybe Hannity will see me, recognize me, and ask me a question. Maybe it'll work. Let's see what happens.
Let me ask you this, because I think this is important. We had 2 tapes now come out. I just saw James O'Keefe in the crowd here a moment ago. We had 2 tapes come out. One shows that money coming directly from the Clinton campaign, funneled through the DNC, funneled through democracy, whatever, right into the hands of agitators fomenting violence, going back as far as Chicago against your father, and a huge, massive voter fraud scheme that they put in orders. This, to me, hasn't even resonated with the American people yet.
No, it has to get out there. And that's part of what he was talking about today. Okay, we'll accept a fair result, but we're not going to accept them when they say, we've been doing this for 50 years. We've been busted. We don't play by the rules. The rules only apply to conservatives, apparently, or maybe we're the only ones with the morals to be able to actually comply by that. This stuff's coming out. This isn't pretend. This is undercover video.
That's James O'Keefe right over there that did the video.
He did a great job, and I think he's doing the American people a great service.
There we go. That's one way to get on television, right? And it worked. It's funny. Credit to Laura, I guess, right? So, yeah, listen, we made it happen, and perhaps to the grand finale here, the New York Times, who you all hate, took a screenshot of the YouTube video and put it in A1 and said, quote, videos force Democrats on defense. Okay? So my vision is to not complain about the media and react to the media and, forgive me, but bitch and whine about how bad it is. My vision is to do more stuff like that and get in their paper. Because maybe an old-fashioned way of doing business is spending money on ads and, advertising on commercials. What about like doing that for free? What about getting in their real estate? That's the New York Times. We created that. We built that. We made that happen by exposing the truth. And it's only a little itty-bitty part of the truth. We only are a few people, and now we're growing. We're growing much bigger. We have a facility. We're hiring more journalists. Every dollar I get goes to a fraction of percentage of hiring another. I spend all the money hiring more people, more and more and more and more and more. And we had 1,000 applications for undercover people last year, 1,000. And that, yes, no one at Project Veritas has a byline except for me. Rush Limbaugh would say, these people are so selfless. They don't, no one knows that that's right. And there we are. There's a portion of our army, fully trained, fully vetted, out there. And if you are lying, cheating, stealing, scamming, you just may become the next unwilling internet celebrity. Thank you very much.
Wow, wow. Who here thinks that James O'Keefe should have his own Fox News show? Call your local cable provider. Okay. We have a time, we've gone a little bit over, but I don't think anybody here really minds, and we want to take some time for some Q&A. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, and somebody with a microphone will come to you. Please try to make your question an actual question and make it brief, and we'll try to get through as many as we can here in about 10, 15 minutes.
Okay, I saw you first, so.
My name is Ray Koch from Northbrook. There's too much power in Washington, D.C. Why does somebody, I ask rhetorically, why does somebody spend $2 million to run for Congress, a job that pays $100,000? That seems to me to be the problem.
Good point. Thank you.
Dean Dahlgren. James, my question in regards to social media.
Where are you? I'm sorry, I don't know where you're. Over there.
I'm
okay.
sorry. In regards to social media, the attack seems to be that, or what's being proposed now is going after them as not unbiased sources. As being when they editorialize your content, they are becoming responsible for it and can be sued for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if that's something an attack that you guys are going to be or exploring.
We are working actively on so many things, but I can't say. But the big tech is a big focus, and you'll see that in the coming months, year or two. Not just us sort of infiltrating, but people inside these companies like James Damore, who were fired from Google. There are people like that who are still on the inside. And one of the things I have to do is convince them that in some cases they have to go public. Or wear a wire if it's legal.
Hi, Jim Economos. I live here locally in Elgin. Just want to let you know I've been an online contributor of yours over the years.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a great job. And I think we should work maybe with your leadership to maybe form an alternate to Facebook and Twitter in a conservative fashion.
An alternate to Twitter. There is something called Gab. You know, there's two different choices. There's the people say regulate them like public utilities. I don't know whether that's the right thing to do or not, whether there should be more government involvement in these sorts of things. But ultimately, I genuinely believe that if the stories are good enough, if the content is good enough, they just won't be able to censor it. So it's our focus is to create really compelling journalism that will, no matter who the censors are, it'll find a way to get out. But yes, there should be a competitor to Twitter.
Hi there. My name is Carol. I'm from Wisconsin. And I'm wondering, do you see any parallels with the Miller investigation and the John Doe witch hunt in Wisconsin that we experienced?
Yes. I mean, the short answer is yes. I do see everything. I mean, listen, people think I'm crazy because they're going to shut you down. They're going to, you know, there's that old Soviet mantra: "Show me the man, and I will find you the crime," which is what I've lived in my life. I mean, it's just arbitrary political witch hunting. I think that the only solution, for at least what we're talking about here with what we're doing, it should hit them back even harder. It's a boxing match, is what it is. And they play dirty, and they play unfair, and they play awful, and it's terrible. And the only thing that we can do is to just do more of the good work that we're doing, whatever you are, whoever you are, is to not back down and go into a crouching tiger position or a fetal position and get inundated with lawyers. And, you know, my lawyer once said, don't leave your bedroom. Stay there. Don't get in trouble. Okay, maybe that's good for being safe, but you know, we got to keep going. So that's my solution, is to just keep going.
Thank you so much for coming. Huge fan. And you said something really interesting, that, you know, Fox fears losing their license, and, you know, from one administration to another that may change, but there has to be a lot more that they fear, right? So
right.
CNN's ratings are way down because they've been exposed for a lot of different reasons. They're pushing these unrealistic narratives for ratings, but the ratings aren't playing out.
Right. It's a really fascinating subject. There's I read, like, again, I read about it ad nauseum in my book about it's really an economic thing, less a political thing. And I'm and you can be a capitalist and you can be a conservative, and that's fine. But at the end of the day, these companies have advertisers, and that's who they serve. And that's what it's, I don't have advertisers. I am a very rare human being. I am a very rare institution in media because nobody tells me what to do. It's actually in our ethical code of conduct. We're not for sale. There's no quid pro quos. If you want to invest in our vision, please do. Here's what we want to do. But these companies have economic realities, and those realities, they're publicly traded companies. They're regulated. Advertiser, the Laura Ingraham thing, all the and then she had to apologize. It's tough. It's real tough, and I don't want to burn the sources that I have inside these places, but they tell me things, and it's terrible. And Kramer from Chicago had met with Sinclair, which is a large broadcast media organization, and basically threatened them. He said, if you air this, we'll make, well, I don't know exactly what he said, but it's in his lawsuit against me. He met with Sinclair the day before they were going to go public. They spiked the story because Bob Kramer threatened them. It's a fact. Why aren't they prosecuting? Oh my God.
But I followed all of this. You know, Kramer's on tape. Where's the FEC?
First of all, you have so many people that you keep giving all your money to in Congress. Why don't you ask them? Okay? I don't know. I don't mean that in a mean way. I don't understand. You give millions and millions and millions of all these politicians, and if you want my honest opinion, my academic opinion, I guess they don't have any balls. I like to say that this stuff speaks for itself. Okay? Fact one, CNN producer says it's a witch hunt. Fact two, Kramer's on tape saying we incite violence and launder money from the Hillary campaign. It's just like, I don't understand it. I don't know what alternative reality these people live in, but maybe the conservative movement should stop giving their money to politicians and give their money to people like me. And people like you, and people like Adam Mengievsky, and anyone who does work that actually makes a damn difference in this country. But until then, you'll keep giving your money to politicians who won't do anything. Next question.
Terry Flanagan, Crystal Lake. Thank you for the Forgotten Man is the solution, telling us that. Waking up the Forgotten Man, which you are doing. But the real question is, what should the Forgotten Man be asking? What question should the Forgotten Man be asking every day to move this forward?
Great question. The Forgotten Man, or as Lippmann would say, the bewildered herd, the people too stupid to be trusted, and the elites that want to censor the information. What question should they be asking? Well, the first thing that they need to, the message of the book American Pravda is don't believe it. Don't believe the media. Just don't believe their crap. And that's the first thing people need to do, is to say, we don't believe you. We don't trust you. That's the first, because a lot of people still do. A lot of people still believe what they see on cable news. And they need to be educated about that. They need to ask themselves the question, is this real? you know, and I only trust it when I see it and hear it, and it's confirmed by the source. So I would say that's the first question that they need to ask.
We have time for a few more. We're going to take one from our viewers online.
So this comes from Russell Cook on YouTube. He asks, I'd say more needs to be exposed about the mainstream media. The public-funded PBS NewsHour is hugely biased, perhaps more so than the New York Times or Twitter. Any chance of targeting them for a future investigation?
Great question. We've investigated CNN, the New York Times, Twitter, and the Washington Post, and this was a tough call internally at Project Veritas going after these institutions, because you fight with people who buy ink by the barrel. I mean, they've really come after us. I mean, we had some 8 billion with a B, Bravo, billion negative media impressions in the fall. The New York Times, and this is a true story, not to get on too much of a tangent here, but it's sort of related. The New York Times called, and BuzzFeed, and I can't remember, there are a number of organizations, called every single foundation which has ever supported, and there's many. The great thing about our donor base is it's so eclectic. There's not like one person, there's many, sometimes there's thousands of people, so they really can't stop us. But they called every foundation and tried to like boycott the foundations that are supporting us, just because we embarrass them, and they still have enormous power. So I would say that we're going to keep doing it. I mean, you know, if you think upsetting the Washington Post and CNN is troubling, what about Google? But if we do that, I would just say that we need your support, both financially and morally and every other way, because these people really fight dirty, okay? The things that you read about me, like our Wikipedia page is locked. You can't even edit it. People are like, well, I thought Wikipedia was open and publicly accessible. No, they locked it because they're that threatened by us. So I would say the one call to action is don't believe what they write about us. Only believe it when people keep getting fired and laws keep changing. That's what you need to believe. So I would say we're going to do it. We're going to keep going after the media. It's very important work. And the other thing about these journalists is they're just nihilists. Like, they're just pathetic people. So I think we need to train our sights on even bigger targets like these social media companies, which really have a lot more power than even the New York Times does.
A couple more. We got one right here.
I'd like to ask something that probably is on the minds of a lot of people here. We've read the stories that the conglomerate of media, when we talk about films, magazines, newspapers, and everything, is down to ownership by 7, 8, 9 people, or 7, 8, 9 groups.
Yes, something like that.
Yeah, can you talk about that and how we get past that?
Yes, that's a very, and listen, this is not a left or right issue. Good question. This is not a left or right issue. This is an issue that, like I said, Noam Chomsky has written about. I think it's become a populist issue. It's a very interesting issue. Yes, a handful of people control media. Media has become a monopoly. And the best analogy I can argue is 110 years ago, there were muckrakers who busted trusts. Now we need to be the trust busters in a way, exposing the information. Very few people control the airwaves, but the way to get around that is to distribute the information online. So it's coming down to these big tech monopolies that need to be exposed. And listen, they have a right to say publicly, we are going to ban conservatives and censor these ideas. I want them to tell the truth. The problem is not so much that they're doing it, as they're lying about doing it. That's what upsets me. I wish they'd be honest. If Jack Dorsey and the CEO of Google and Mark Zuckerberg came out tomorrow and said, Project Veritas is right, we do shadow ban, and here's a list of all the people we shadow ban, and here's our algorithms and how we do it, I would actually give them a pat on the back, because I think the majority of people would say that's terrible, and they'd reform the system, right? But they're lying to you. So that the number one thing they got to do, these trusts, these monopolists, is they have to be honest. And right now, there's no one that's going to keep them honest, because they're all in their back pocket, or they're afraid of them, or they want to get information shared. So the key thing is to keep them honest.
2 more. We got one right here.
Yes.
A complaint with the FBI asking that Creamer be investigated, and nothing seems to be happening with that. We were hoping under Trump that, and of course the FBI seems to be busy on other things today.
Right.
But do you think we could ever get the FBI to investigate specifically your video and Bob Kramer?
Again, I'm not a subject matter on the FBI and all these things. But to your point, you're talking about, I think it's a rhetorical question. You're talking about the deep state, and you're talking about these forces at play that don't have equal justice under law, you know, and the most I can say is I can't talk about what we're doing, but Project Veritas is looking into some of these sorts of issues, these sorts of deep state things, and it's very fascinating to see these agencies not following their oath and applying the law equally, but we're looking into that. I don't have the power to prosecute people. I wish I don't even want, actually I don't want that power. I don't ever want to run for office. I will never run for, I don't ever want to do that. Because I just believe this so strongly that it's just about informing people. So many people ask me this question, why aren't they prosecuting? I don't know. I think you need to put pressure on the people that you donate to and in Congress. I don't know. What I can tell you is that we will be looking into agencies in DC and really investigating those as we dig deeper.
Last one right here. My favorite movie is Absence of Malice, and Paul Newman character turns the tables on a prosecutor, and there's an investigation afterwards, and the investigator asks Paul Newman the question I'm going to ask you.
All right.
Are you that smart?
I guess I'd leave it at that. I don't know what to say. That sounds like a good punchline. Yes. I think it's well, I guess I'll answer seriously. I think it's not about, this is going to sound corny, but it's not about talent, like that cliche about it's not about talent. It's about perseverance. There's plenty of educated idiots. Unrewarded talent is almost a proverb. It really comes down to perseverance and willpower, and do we have the will to do it? There is no rational reason why I should continue doing this after being jailed and sued and disgraced and defamed by corrupt media. But it's just sort of, you pick yourself up and you do the next one. And someone was joking at the table here about how I've had 9 lives. Like, I probably have an infinite number of lives if I just keep going. Because there's so much, in this room, a few years ago, I wouldn't have spoken to a room this big. And they hit me harder and harder every year. So you just got to keep going, and I encourage people to do that. We're building an army right there. Those are people who work full-time, not part-time. Those are not 30-hour, those are 60 to 70-hour-a-week people that are paid fair market value for their services. They're well paid. We've got producers one of them has won an Emmy Award. We've got people who've worked in the intelligence community, ethical, good people who've worked in the intelligence agencies. We've got good people working there, and we're just growing. We're hiring. We're building. And I think it's going to get to the point where if the system wants to try to shut us down, they just can't. They just won't. They just can't. You have to have faith. You got to keep going. So we will keep going. Thank you very much. All right. All right.